Thanks everybody for joining. We're going to get started. Hank is handsome. He's the newest STS member and part of our core group calls now, giving all the advice. So on the line with me from STS, we have Leanne Jones, Addie Dolan, Emily Conrad, Melinda Offer, Sydney Clinton, and myself. And then from IQVIA, we have Jean, Joe, Melanie, and Steve. And our special speaker today is Nancy Honeycutt. She will be presenting our educational session for today. I'm going to give her a brief introduction now so we can go right into her presentation when it's fine. Nancy is from Novant Health Presbyterian Medical Center in Charleston, North Carolina. She's been a nurse for nearly 30 years with half of her career spent in bedside nursing in the ED and the CVICU, and the most recent half in quality, safety, process improvement, and data management. She's been a data manager for the ACSD for 15 years, so a ton of experience. During that time, she was also responsible for starting GTSD, getting GTSD started, and the TVT registry at her hospital, which was one of the first TVT centers in North Carolina. She also briefly extracted for Cath PCI. She is one of our famous core group members, and she's a member of the NCAHQ, which is the North Carolina Health Quality Area. So thanks, Nancy, for joining. We're looking forward to your presentation, and I am going to get started here. So we did the welcome and introductions. I have just a couple important dates, updates, IQVIA updates, and then we'll go to Nancy with the aorta education and then Q&A. I'd like to save questions regarding the report that came out for our upgrade webinar or our user group webinar. I think it's in 2 weeks. I just want to make sure that folks have enough time to review their report. So for those folks who maybe haven't been in the office for the last 2 days, the report was released Sunday night into Monday. I just want to give folks enough time to review that, and then we'll be spending time on the user group call to go over those questions. So if you could please just hold those questions until that time, or I've been getting a lot of questions via email. Please send them in to IQVIA or to myself, and I'll try to get a response out to you quickly. Otherwise, if you could hold off until the user group call, that would be great, so everybody could hear the answers to the questions that are coming in. Today is our monthly webinar, May 4th, and May the 4th be with you. And then May 18th is our user group call, so I'll dedicate this one to going over the reports, and then Melinda will provide some education on the coding of post-operative renal failure and creatinine post-op. And May 27th is the Harvest 2 close date, which will contain OR dates through March 31st, 2022. And June 1st, and I can't even believe I'm saying June 1st, is our monthly webinar at 2 p.m. and the opt-out for Harvest 2 will end that day. Just the 2022 harvest close dates, none of these have changed since last time. And quick updates from STS. Harvest 1, as I said, has been posted. The OR dates through December 31st, 2021. This is a star rating period. So please review that. If for some reason your site did not receive star ratings, please reach out to IQVIA STS tech support at IQVIA.com, and they will be able to provide you with information as to why your site did not receive a star rating. Sorry about that. The May training manual was posted, and then I just want to talk a little bit about the STS password required for the database resource. This came down from STS leadership that we needed to put our database resource documents behind password protection. So that was implemented either Friday or Monday. And what that means is you'll need to log in to access the training manual or data collection forms or any of the version documentation. The password that you use is the same login information you did if you were joined AQO. If you were at AQO this year, it's that same information, same login and password. And I'll show you very quickly here. 1 second. and you can hear Sophie talking to Hank. She's letting him know that she's in charge. Uh-oh, there we go. So when you go to I'm already logged in, so you're not going to see exactly what it will look like, but I'll show you here. This is what the login page looks like when you get to the web portal. When you go to click on registries, STS National Database, Adult Cardiac, and you go to click Access Data Collection Resources, that's when that login page will appear, and you fill in your login name and password. If you have questions on your login name and password, you're going to use this Get Started button, and our membership team will help you out with that. Otherwise, you can contact STS membership for more information on that. Okay, and then I'm going to hand it over to Joe for the IQVIA updates. Joe?
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Hank. So we don't have that much today. A couple items that were released in an update last weekend on April 30th. An update to the NQF outcome measures mortality report. STS 8059, the odds ratios for the NQF mortality outcome measures were incorrectly being displayed as a percentage rather than a decimal, and so that should now be resolved. STS 8278, the results for some of the anesthesia benchmarks were showing values over 100%, and so that's been corrected as well. And then STS 7887, calculations for the multiple arterial grafts greater than 1 benchmark were reviewed with the STS and brought into line with expected logic. So if some updates to that calculation were made, that brings the report in line with what's expected. Next slide. And so STS 8072 has been reopened. It's found to have still been an issue. This has to do with the beta blockers within 24 hours on the risk-adjusted dashboard benchmark report not calculating correctly. The AEP calculation is including cases that should be excluded. So that we are looking into once again and looking to get that resolved once and for all. And then an issue with the DCRI analysis itself, the composite results for failed to prescribe patient exclusions. Those are still appearing within the drill down. DCRI has confirmed that the participant level results are correct. So your overall results are fine. The issue appears with Harvest 1 2022 and earlier harvests. So for the next harvest, Harvest 2 2022, that will be corrected when those results get deployed. And I think that's all I had. So usual reminders that if you did have a ticket that that you're looking for an update on, feel free to reach out and we can look into that for you. And then we will be posting to the notifications section any items that are released in an upcoming update. And that's
wonderful. Thank you. And sorry, everybody. Hank likes to find the loudest toys possible when I get on a phone call, and he's only been here for 2 weeks, or a week and a half. So I think he's figured it out. Sorry, Joe. And that's Sophie. Yeah, that's Sophie. Okay. All right. I'm going to put myself on mute after I introduce Nancy Honeycutt here, who's going to walk us through some education for the aorta. And I just want to thank Nancy again for taking time up to prepare this presentation and to present it for us today. So thank you, Nancy, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I'm going to be providing some education on the aorta. We're going to do just a brief overview of some anatomy, and then we'll jump right into coding. I think that anatomy is important when looking at the aorta when you're trying to code. So we will do a short review of that. I know that some of you have heard this talk before, so we won't take too long on that, so we can spend most of the time on the coding part. I don't know about you guys, but as a data manager, I'm often finding myself at the corner of confused and perplexed every single time I pick up an aortic case. Even though I do a lot of these, I still have questions, just like you all. And I still have to look things up. So why is the aorta such a challenge? Well, like I said, the anatomy is complex. We need to know the normal and the abnormal. There are multiple components to the procedures, multiple pathologies, multiple implants and devices, and then multiple techniques to accomplish the same goal. The main thing when coding the aorta is to remember to keep it simple. Keep calm, as the Queen would say, keep calm and carry on. You have plenty of resources at your disposal when you're coding the aorta. The main thing to remember is to keep your training manual open, handy at your fingertips, so that you can easily look things up when you have a question. And I highly recommend that you use the annotated data collection form, which can be found on the website. This will aid you in going to the training manual, which, as you know, is multiple pages. You can use the Control F function within the PDF document and use the sequence number to get right to the area where you need to go. Past webinars, slides, I know the slides from AQO are still posted in the Learning Center on the STS website. Refer to those if you need to. And one thing that I like to say is to keep a friend on speed dial. Have somebody that you can bounce things off of if you need some help or you have a question. Another good resource for you is Google. I'm a very visual person, and you're going to see lots of diagrams in this talk. Google is great for diagrams. If you have an anatomy question or you need to know what something looks like, or even if you have a question about a device or an implant, Google is a good resource. You can just type in the manufacturer and find your device if you have a question. Also, not on this slide, I would encourage you to hook up with a regional group. Regional groups are very useful and helpful and typically provide some good education during their meetings. And then also consider attending AQO. I've heard, before I began speaking on the aorta, I've heard many aorta talks as well as other talks, and I always learn something. So even after 15 years of doing this, I always learn something. And then last but not least, you can ask a clinical question. You could access the FAQ mailbox on the STS website. Next. Above all, while you're keeping calm and keeping it simple, one of the best tips I can share for you guys when you're abstracting these cases is to bottom line it. Most of the information that you need to code aortas, or any procedure for that matter, can be found in the findings and the procedure sections of your operative report. You want to look for keywords. You want to identify the anatomy that's involved. Identify the procedure. Was it a repair, a replacement, or a combination of both? Identify your implant. Keywords, especially key for aortas, is, was there circulatory arrest involved in the case? If that's the case, then you know you may be dealing with an arch procedure. Was there coronary artery reimplantation? Was there a hemiarch? Did this case involve any debranching or arch branch reimplantation? All of those things can be found in your operative report and will help you get started. Once you have kind of an outline of where you're going with this case, then you can dig into the operative report and get your finer details. So the key to unlocking the mystery behind coding the aorta is to have a good understanding of the anatomy, and you need to understand the normal and the abnormal. Next. So when talking about aortic procedures, we start with the aortic valve. So normally your aortic valve is going to contain 3 leaflets or 3 cusps, and it will be tricuspid. This is normal. The cusps are named as to their location. So the right coronary cusp is associated with the right coronary artery. The left coronary cusp is associated with the left coronary artery, and the non-coronary cusp is on the side of the valve. There are no coronary arteries. And usually with a normal tricuspid aortic valve, your defect in this area is going to be degenerative in nature. So think aortic stenosis. Next. So when you have an aortic valve that is bicuspid, or for that matter, unicuspid or quadricuspid, this is different from your normal anatomy. Bicuspid valve is 2 leaflets, and you can see the diagram to the right. Defects in a bicuspid valve situation are usually congenital in nature. One thing to note, if you have a situation where the surgeon documents that there has been fusion of the leaflets, then you're going to want to make sure you code that etiology as degenerative rather than congenital. Next. So next, we move on to the aortic root. The root is the area between the aortic valve and the sinotubular junction. So it includes everything between the valve and the STJ. This corresponds to zone A on our data collection form. So lots of important anatomy within the root. You have your sinuses, and then your right and left coronary arteries come off of the root. Next. Then at the sinotubular junction, we come upon the ascending aorta. This is the tubular part of the aorta, and it includes everything between the STJ and the innominate. And this is going to correspond to zones B and C. Next, we have the aortic arch. This is the part of the aorta that starts to curve around, and you can see in the diagram, and it includes your arch vessels, the innominate, the left common carotid, and the left subclavian. And this corresponds with zones 1 through 3. Then you have your descending thoracic. This extends from the distal arch, which is the end of zone 3, to the diaphragm just above the celiac arteries, and that is going to correspond to zones 4 and 5. Next. So when dealing with aorta procedures, you have multiple types of devices or implants. You have your aortic valve implant by itself, or you may come across the aortic valve and a tube graft combined. So if figure A is a visual of the composite valve conduit. This is from the manufacturer, and it is one piece. It contains your aortic valve implant and your tube graft. And this can be mechanical or it can be bioprosthetic. Then in figure B, this is a surgeon fashioned device. This is your everyday run-of-the-mill aortic valve implant combined with a tube graft that your surgeon assembles in the operating room. And then figure C is showing the aortic root bioprosthesis. This is an example of the Medtronic Freestyle. I still see quite a few of these. And this is an aortic valve combined with an aortic root. Next. All right, so we have multiple devices, we have complex anatomy. We also have multiple techniques to accomplish the same goal. So the surgeon can replace the aortic valve, the root, and the ascending aorta. The surgeon can replace just the aortic valve in the root, can replace the root and the aorta, or the aortic valve and the ascending aorta. You can also have a repair situation where the valve is resuspended and the surgeon performs a primary repair of the root and or the ascending aorta. And then you can have a combination of both, repair and replace. And then you have your valve sparing techniques, the David, the Jakub, and the floor to sleeve. And we'll talk about those further in the presentation. So the main, well, not the main thing, but one thing you need to remember when you're capturing an aortic valve procedure along with a root and an ascending aorta or aortic arch procedure, you need to make sure you're coding the aortic valve portion in the aorta section, which is M2. Next. And so in order to get to that on your data collection form, you would check aorta procedure, yes, valve procedure, yes, then aortic valve procedure performed, yes, and then was a procedure performed on the aorta. And you would select yes. So this moves your aortic valve to the aorta section. So first, we're going to talk about the Bentall procedure. This procedure is 3 components, and you can see in the figure to the right, you're going to have replacement of the aortic valve, replacement of the root with reimplantation of the coronary arteries, and then reimplant or replacement of the ascending aorta. Now, you may not see, the surgeon may or may not, more likely not, identify this procedure as a Bentall procedure. What you're going to see in your operative report will be something like I have listed below: ascending aorta replacement, root replacement with a valved conduit, or AVR, ascending aorta, root replacement, or AVR, root, hemiarch. You may not see Bentall, but all of these procedures are coded the same way. Next. So you're going to code the Bentall procedure beginning with sequence number 4951, aortic valve or root procedure performed. And then you will proceed to 4963, root procedure, then 4975, surgical ascending arch procedure. And then you code your devices in 5440. One point to remember: if your surgeon uses a composite valve conduit or a biologic full root, in the aortic valve replacement section where you're being asked to describe your device type in sequence number 4956, instead of checking mechanical or bioprosthetic, you're going to select other. Then you're going to further describe the implant or device in the root section. So 4965, you're going to choose composite valve conduit. And then you move on to 4966 and 4967 and code bioprosthetic, and then valve conduit versus biologic full root, whichever one you have. So what if you have a situation where the surgeon replaces the root and the aorta and no procedure is performed on the aortic valve? Well, what you're going to do in that situation is you still have to code yes to 4951, aortic valve or root procedure, in order to capture the root in 4963. So you'll be leaving, in this situation, you'll be leaving 4952, the replacement section, you'll be leaving that blank. Valve sparing root procedures. These are aortic and aortic root procedures that spare the aortic valve. In other words, there's not an aortic valve replacement. We have the David, the Jakub, and the floor to sleeve. And so figure A is an example of the David procedure. This is where the coronary arteries are detached from the root, and then an ascending aortic or an aortic tube graft is placed, and then the coronary arteries are reattached to the tube graft. Then figure B is the Yacoub procedure. And this is where the aortic root is reinforced. The surgeon makes scallops in the tube graft to reinforce the root. And then you have the floor to sleeve, which is figure C. This is where the surgeon makes openings in the tube graft, and then he places the tube graft over the top of the root and the coronary arteries. So there's no reimplantation of the coronary arteries. So valve-sparing root procedures oftentimes involve resuspension of the aortic valve rather than replacement. And they typically use a commissural resuspension suture. So this would get coded in the aortic valve section, and this would be a repair. And you would select leaflet commissural suture or resuspension suture. And so something you may see in your operative report, a context clue, as I like to call it, that I remember from like English class a million years ago. Something you might see, the aortic valve was resuspended at the tops of each commissure with pledgeted mattress sutures. That would be a clue that you're dealing with a repair or a valve sparing procedure. And with the valve sparing roots, you capture the root portion of the valve sparing procedure in the root section. You still have to select yes to 4964 because you need to get to 4965 so that you can select valve sparing root. And then in the case of the floor to sleeve, you have to say yes to root replacement with coronary osteal reimplantation so that you can capture 4965 valve sparing root. And then you would code no to coronary reimplantation. So when you're talking about,
yeah, switch slides too quickly.
No,
Okay.
you're good. Thank you. When we're talking about coronary artery reimplantation, in order to replace the root, the surgeon is going to need to remove the coronary arteries. And so there's 3 techniques. The button technique is the technique that's pictured. So what happens is the surgeon detaches the coronary arteries from the aortic root and then reattaches them to the tube graft. So you can also have a situation where the coronary artery isn't long enough or it might be damaged, and the surgeon will use a vein graft extension to reattach the coronary arteries to the new root. And this is called a saphenous vein graft Cabral procedure. And he can also, or she can do the same thing with a Dacron graft extension. That's a classic Cabral. And so in our database, we can only code 1 choice. And so if the surgeon uses 2 choices, then you're going to want, for example, if button technique is used along with Cabral, you're going to want to code the Cabral procedure. If you have a situation where you have a saphenous vein graft Cabral combined with classic, you want to code the saphenous vein graft Cabral. So in your operative report, you may see language such as the leaflets were excised, the sinuses were resected, and coronary buttons were developed. Then they'll go on and talk about the sutures were taken through the annulus, through the sewing ring of the conduit. The conduit was seated, and then the coronary buttons were oriented and anastomosed to the neo root. So that's a documentation example of coronary artery reimplantation and the button technique. So then on our data collection form, we come to the surgical ascending arch procedure section. And then in this section, 4976, we're going to code the proximal location of our tube graft. And Then we get asked about distal technique, sequence 4980. So what this is, what the intent of this question is to know, was the distal anastomosis performed with or without a clamp? So arch procedures are typically performed with the aortic clamp removed. This is so that the surgeon can visualize the barrel of the aorta, and they can see the arch vessels. And you'll typically see that in the documentation. They'll say something like, able to visualize through the barrel of the aorta, arch vessels visualized, something of that nature. This technique requires circulatory arrest. And so this is the open unclamped procedure, or open unclamped technique. Clamped, if the surgeon leaves the aorta clamped, he's typically working on the ascending aorta. And the aortic clamp is left in place and not removed. I know this throws people off sometimes because you've coded in the operative section that the surgeon placed a cross clamp, and then you're saying in this section that the procedure was performed open and unclamped. This is because the aortic clamp is removed for circulatory arrest. So circulatory arrest is complete cessation of the blood flow to the patient. It's used during aortic procedures, aortic arch procedures, and it's a technique that involves cooling the body and stopping blood circulation. And the reason that surgeons do this is to keep the surgical field free of blood so that they can see what they're operating on. A lot of times you'll find in your operative report that the surgeon is using cerebral perfusion. And what this means is that circulatory arrest is employed, and they turn the pump off to the body, but they direct the circulation toward the brain so that they're allowing blood flow and support to the brain while circulation has been stopped to the rest of the body. And so this minimizes the risk of stroke and other complications. And so some context clues that you will see: after completion of the route, we reached 18 degrees Celsius and turned off the pump, removed our cross clamp. And you would code the distal technique in this situation as open and unclamped. Of course, in the operative section, you would also code the circulatory arrest and all of the data elements that pertain to that in the operative section. Next. Oh, here we go. And now we're going to talk about the aortic arch procedures. So hemi-arch, partial arch, and total arch. Next. So hemi-arch, this is where you have a single anastomosis somewhere in the aorta, the ascending or the proximal arch, without separate grafts to the head vessels. And so you can see from the diagrams that the anastomosis distally has moved up into the arch. It's on the lower curvature, or the lesser curvature. And these hemi-arch anastomoses require circulatory arrest and are performed open and unclamped, like we just talked about. And so context clues for this procedure, your surgeon may say something like, the aorta was trimmed with the bevel extending on the underside of the arch, opposite the left subclavian, or lesser curvature of the arch. So hemi-arch, just think half of the arch. So they're going along the bottom of the arch. And so distal site, hemi-arch, and in these cases, there is no arch branch reimplantation. So you would be coding that data element as no. Then the diagrams on this slide show partial arch and total arch. So the first diagram is partial arch. And you can see that the distal anastomosis in this diagram has gone up into the arch, and it's on the lower or the lesser curvature and the upper. The next diagram here is a total arch with an island. And you could see that the coronary or the arch vessels have been left intact with the native aorta in this situation, and the graft has been sewn around them, and there's kind of an island there. Then the next figure is total arch, and this you can see that the arch vessels have been detached. The graft material was placed, and then the arch vessels have been reattached to the graft material. These are performed under circulatory arrest. And then for your distal site, you're going to need to code the appropriate zone. Distal extension. So 4990, sequence 4990. This is the question that asked, was there an elephant trunk technique? And so elephant trunk is where the surgeon leaves excess graft material into the aorta to facilitate subsequent treatment of distal aneurysms. This would be something you would see if they're planning to take the patient back to the OR, or they may be planning to do a TEVAR or an endovascular repair of this dissection or aneurysm. Elephant trunk, it would be a graft, and then frozen elephant trunk refers to a distal extension, which uses a stent graft as opposed to a tubular graft. So then we move on our data collection form to arch branch reimplantation. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as debranching. And this is where the arch vessels are removed from the aorta and then reattached. So this is sequence 4995 and 4996. And so in this figure to the left, you see that the 3 arch vessels have been removed from the native aorta, and then the surgeon has placed a tube graft like about halfway up, or actually looks like maybe zone 1 between the innominate and the left carotid. And then the arch vessels have been reattached to the graft material with separate grafts. And so you would code the location as to 4996 as to which vessels were reattached. And so in this case, we have the innominate, the left common carotid, and the left subclavian. And you could have any combination of those. They may only detach the innominate or all 3. Next. So in the figure 1, the island arch, or the island arch that we have here in figure 1, you can see that no arch branches were detached and reimplanted. So for arch branch reimplantation, in this situation, you would code no to 4995. Next. And then in figure 2, you can see that that 3 arch branches have been detached and reimplanted. So in this example, you would code innominate, left common carotid, and left subclavian. Next. So devices. Only devices that are implanted within the aorta are coded in the device section. This includes all synthetic prosthetics, Dacron grafts, homografts, autografts, stents, stent grafts, and patch grafts. Felt and bioglue are not included. And just a note, not all aortic procedures are going to have a device. Your surgeon may just suture. And the example I have here would be suturing or the primary repair of a pseudoaneurysm. A word about devices. So only devices that reside in the aorta are coded in the device section. So in our example of this figure to the right, the device that's labeled 2 the implant number 2 in the device section is not going to be coded, as it's not located within the aorta. You're capturing this device when you code arch branch reimplantation 4995 and 4996. The only device in this diagram or situation that you're going to code in the device section is number 3, the actual aortic graft. Next. So you want to code aortic valve implants, composite valve conduits, and biologic full roots in the device section beginning with 5440 and 5441. And then in 42 and 43, you're going to include your size and model number. Next. Your surgeon fashion devices. So these are the ones, remember, and you can see the diagram down at the bottom. Those are the ones that are the aortic valve implant with a tube graft added to it in the OR. So the aortic valve implant gets coded in beginning with 5440. And then you're going to code the tube graft and or stent grafts if your surgeon has done an endovascular procedure in 5450. And remember, when you're coding your grafts, you want to make sure that the location is coded twice, because we want to capture the proximal and distal location of the device. And another thing that I don't have on this slide, back to the composite valve conduits, we're only coding those in 5440 and 5441. So your 5450, where you have your grid, that is going to be left blank for the composite valve conduits. And on your data quality report, that's going to show up as missing. And so just taking this same example, this was, you can tell from the figure, the surgeon replaced the aortic valve, reimplanted the coronary arteries, debranched the arch, and then anastomosed the graft midway through the arch. So to code this, 5440, device inserted, yes. Aortic valve or aortic valve composite graft implanted, yes. And then you would capture your aortic valve. And then, since this is a separate device, you would capture the graft figure number 3. Actually, this my slide is incorrect. So this would be, rather than zone B, it would be zone A, below the sinotubular junction, because you know that the root was replaced, since you can see that the coronary arteries were reimplanted. So the proximal location would be A rather than B here. And then open surgical technique, and then successfully deployed. And then this particular device in this diagram, you can see that it's actually 2 grafts. So you would code the distal location as C, mid to distal ascending. And then this portion of the graft that goes up into the arch would start proximally in at the mid ascending. So C corresponds to C on our form. And then goes to zone D, which is zone 1. And then we do not code the debranching, since this device labeled number 2 is not residing within the aorta itself. Also, a note, the UDI number, this is a big, long number that comes from the manufacturer. It identifies, it's an identifier for the device. The STS does not want us to enter this manually. Copy and paste it into your software if you're able. If you're unable to do that, then leave it blank. Okay, a few things to think about. Annular enlargement is part of the aortic valve replacement, so don't code a separate root procedure if the case is just an isolated AVR with annular enlargement. And this is basic, but it bears repeating, because I know a lot of people get confused by this. Surgical ascending aorta and arch procedures involve an incision, and the aorta is replaced with a graft. Thoracic endovascular aortic repairs, or TEVAR, are catheter-based procedures where a stent graft is deployed into the aorta. Hybrid aortic procedures, which would be a combination of your surgical or your open aortic case and a TEVAR, occurring during the same episode of care, are captured with the index procedure on the same data collection form, and you want to use the OR times from the open procedure. I think that's all I have. So hopefully we have time to get to a few questions.
It's a really, really great presentation, Nancy. Thank you. Lots of positive feedback on it. It seems like it helped quite well, everybody that's on. There are a few questions for you. The first thing, I think I just, two things that I want to address are, we can update the slides before we post them, just to change that one to code A instead of B,
Right.
for the area. And then the other one, we have a slightly different picture of how we define zone 1 in the training manual. So let's look at that before we post them, just to make sure we have the right anatomical description for that. Melinda, if you don't mind helping with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. It was fantastic. I can't think of a better person to give these presentations for us. So thank you very much. Let's go to the questions. Are you ready? Oh, yeah, I mean, look at all the positive feedback. Just, you're wonderful, Nancy. I want to give you a hug. Okay.
Thank you.
So we don't, this is from Bonnie. So it says, so we don't code bicuspid if fusion is mentioned. Even if documented as such, we should code this as degenerative. Which degenerative option should we code, or code? Should it be calcified? And I can pull up the data collection form. I don't know if that's helpful or not, or sometimes it's.
Yeah, so if the surgeon is telling you that the valve is bicuspid because, say, the right coronary cusp and the left coronary cusp are fused, and they've mentioned calcium, this is coded as degenerative, and yes, it would be calcified.
And I'll just add another comment in there. Sometimes they'll document that as a functional bicuspid
Correct.
valve, but so it's functionally forming, it's performing like a bicuspid valve, but it's not a congenital bicuspid valve. It was created by this fusion, and it's calcified. So that's why we code it degenerative.
Correct. I forgot to mention that. I do see that coded or documented like that a lot.
I've got to take myself off mute. Next question is from Schwen. It says left ventricular outflow tract. Does it count as aortic root?
Melinda, I'm going to say no.
Well, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say, and then we can see if we agree. This is a tricky one. This is a tricky one because sometimes it involves the root and sometimes it doesn't involve the root. And so you have to read the op note, really, because we see a lot of left ventricular outflow tract stuff done in endocarditis cases, and that's not necessarily coded as a root procedure. If it, because sometimes that's just an annular reconstruction, and we've instructed sites to code that as other cardiac. So it really depends on the op note. Nancy, if you've got anything else to add to that.
No, I don't.
It's a tricky one. That's a tricky one,
Yeah.
I'll say.
Before people, I'm so used to talking, I'm not used to muting myself, and I keep on talking when I'm muted, so I apologize. Before we move on, I just want to say that got a lot of questions for your slides, Nancy, and I hope that you don't mind if that we share them with folks. We post these on the webinar page for the database, so
No, I don't mind at all.
Okay, thank you. So we will post these and they will be on the database webinar page. Okay, next question is modified David or modified Yakub the same as a David or Yakub?
Melinda, do you want to help me with that one?
Yeah, I think a lot of time, I think now you'll see surgeons, instead of doing a complete David or a complete Yakub, they will do a modified version of it. And I've told people it's to me it's close enough to code as a David or Yakub, because it's clearly just, it may be just a minor modification of that procedure.
Okay, next question. What is a wheat versus a modified wheat? And I think it's probably similar to the same question we just asked regarding David Yakub's.
Melinda,
Well,
take that one.
yeah, I get all the hard ones. So anyway, the wheat procedure basically is where you replace the ascending aortic with the graft, and then you also replace the valve separately, and you don't reimplant the coronary. So that's what a wheat is when they're talking about a wheat. It's basically you're replacing the aorta, you're replacing the valve, but you're not manipulating the coronaries. Now,
Right,
when you talk,
where if you were manipulating the coronaries or you were managing the coronaries, you would consider that a Bentall.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So a modified wheat is a modification of that, some form or fashion. I don't see hardly any of these being done out there, or I don't see many questions about these. We do have a selection on the data collection form, which is called a modified wheat, modified Yakub. Now that's a completely different, that's where you're replacing the non-coronary sinuses. So it's like a sinus replacements. That's a totally different procedure, which is why we have a separate selection for that. Like I said, these are fairly uncommon. Nancy, do you see these very often?
I very rarely see these.
Yeah, not very common.
Okay, thank you. We do cerebral perfusion without circulatory arrest, unable to enter cerebral perfusion data.
I've not come across that before.
I don't think we
Well,
ever have. I haven't either.
I Googled it real quick because I've never really seen it, but apparently there are some people doing this. And I think that for that question, you probably need to send that into the mailbox so we can kind of talk about how if we can capture that at all, because need to process that one a little bit, work through it a little bit.
Yeah, and we know that the aorta section, evolves. So it could be something, as they're evolving techniques, this is something that they have recently started doing that we might need to review this for a future upgrade, which we don't have a date yet for. It sounds interesting. Leanne, would you mind showing the IQVIA slide again? The IQVIA updates. Okay, for sequence 4750, if the surgeon states the tear involves the entire ascending aorta, how would you code this? Surgeon documents patient had a huge aortic dissection involving the entire ascending aorta, a tear above the right coronary ostia, and extended 270 degrees around the aortic root.
So that sounds like, so that would involve the root and the ascending aorta. So surgical.
Yeah, because it's right above the coronary ostia.
So you would have to code the root and
For sequence 40 numbers.
sequence number.
Yeah, let's see what 4750 is exactly. I don't
Yeah.
know
Yeah, I'm
exactly
just
what
gonna,
that is.
I'm gonna pull up I'm gonna share my screen, Leanne. Thank you. Leanne took over quickly for screen sharing because I had to do a potty run. Of course. I took them out right before the
Okay.
call.
Oh, so 4750 is primary tear location.
Yeah, let me pull it up real quick here.
And so I believe that we always code the location closest or most proximal to the heart. And so in this case, you would code below the STJ because the dissection involved the root.
Yeah, unless you have some other documentation that the surgeon says where the primary entry tear was, because it may have extended, proximally, or, I mean, but given if this is all the documentation we have, and, I think Nancy's right, but, really the surgeon is really the final arbitrator of this, where the primary tear location is. So if you have questions or concerns, you're not sure, you should ask your surgeon. Where did it really start? Because it can extend proximally or distally.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. I agree. We have Carolyn has her hand up, so I'm just gonna, if you could just unmute Carolyn and feel free to go ahead and talk. If you can. Okay,
I don't think I was just asking about the slides, so I'm not sure how it ended up that I had my hand raised. I'm sorry.
That's okay, but it's nice to hear you. Thanks. Thanks,
No problem.
thanks for joining. Okay, and then I have Elizabeth has her hand up. So okay, Elizabeth. You just have to unmute if you'd like to speak. And while you do that, I am going to may update 2020 2129 op valve. Can you confirm this does not apply to TAVRs?
I have to look it up. We have to look. I don't.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull it up here 1 second.
2129. That's the sequence number. Look at the training manual. Yeah.
Okay. And just so you know, when you log in, you only have to log in once a day. I already logged in this morning and I've been in and out of the STS website. I don't have to log back in. But just so you know, I too have to log in. So
Me too.
so yeah, that's just how it is right now.
Now, what does
so
the May
this-
update say? Let's see.
Yeah, endovascular aortic valve repair in ACSD does not require entry into ACSD. If you choose to enter it, then enter it as other cardiac other. Do not enter it as an AV repair. And I'll let you explain that one, Melinda.
Yeah, this is not a TAVR. This is an endovascular aortic valve repair. So they're actually going in and not doing a TAVR. They're actually going in repairing the aortic valve in some fashion, and we don't want those entered in. But if your surgeon chooses, he says he wants it to go in, we don't want it entered as an AV repair because it's not the kind of AV repair we want in our AV repair bucket. So you enter it as other cardiac.
Yep, thank you. Jean just wanted to make sure she says thank you. And again, lots of positive feedback for Nancy. Schwen just clarified that this is the question about the LVOT and if it's a root or not, root procedure or not. And Schwen's saying that they put a graft about 3 centimeters long over the LVOT.
She's going to have to send me that op note.
Yeah, I would say submit it to Melinda. We shouldn't answer those kinds of questions we're not really sure of. So I shouldn't answer those questions. I don't know anything.
I shouldn't either answer those if I'm not familiar with. I haven't looked at an op note. I don't know what they're doing in there.
Yeah, Two more questions here. First is, I'm waiting for a mentor. Is there any other people I can call for my questions? First, I would say to please reach out to Melinda through the FAQ mailbox. She's going to be your best resource. And I think that's, and then on these webinars, I think is probably the two places I would go. Do you agree, Melinda?
Yeah, and then also, if if you have an active regional group that you guys, there's some people in your region that you guys get together or have webinars or whatever, and you form a network. You can also reach out to people that networking's important, and it's good to know a lot of people. I actually have people I reach out to. I have my go-to people too, if you could believe it. So I think it's important to have those resources.
Great, thanks. And last question from Susan. It says, can you tell me the date of the data manager webinar that explained all of the reporting for adult cardiac? So I know we've gone through it before. I don't know the dates off the top, off of the top of my head, but we will be reviewing it on the user group call that is coming up here. Let's see if I can pull up the slides.
I know it was before I went to Texas. So I think it was November or December or October of last year. It was sometime in the fall. I think it was before Christmas.
Yeah, I can't remember. I know that we went through it, but it's probably good to go through it again. I don't mind doing it as long as we can. The user group call is scheduled for May 18th, so we can do it on that day. So if you're listening and you want to go through the report together, we're going to do it on May 18th. It amazes me how much data is needed for the aorta procedures. When will the risk models be out? The risk models are in development within our quality and measurement task force. And they're moving along pretty nicely. It takes some time to build models to make sure they get the right variables, the risk model variables, the right endpoints, and the right procedure. As you know, the aorta procedures aren't just as specific as a coronary or a valve procedure. So it takes a little bit of time to figure all of that stuff out, and hopefully it'll be out soon. It is moving along though. And then Hannah is saying conferences are the best place to connect with resources. And yeah, that's where we make friends and find people to talk to about all things adult cardiac. Okay, I guess we're at time. Oh, where can I find what the multiple morbidities are in the quality star report details? So I think, Melissa, are you the one who had sent me an email? I may have sent you back over to IQVIA just to confirm what they're including in that line. I couldn't tell from the screenshot that was sent. But the multiple, if you're looking at the quality star rating report details, multiple morbidities are going to be the endpoints that are included in the composite. So those will be your endpoints. So it would be multiple of these: stroke, surgical reexploration, deep sternal wound, post-op renal failure, or prolonged vent. And also, if I've been receiving a ton of emails with the report release and a lot of questions regarding folks' reports. When you send me a question and you refer to a page number, I don't download reports to see what's on what page. All I have is really access to the IQVIA platform. So please take screenshots of what your question is when you send it in to me, so I don't have to ask you to. We don't have to go back and forth with me requesting screenshots. If I can see the screenshot that you send in, I can either answer the question or know that it needs to go to IQVIA. So please make sure if you're sending me in a question, send a screenshot if it's applicable, so I can review that for you quickly. Okay, all right, we're gonna head off here. I wanna say thank you to Nancy for a wonderful presentation. I hope that we can have you back soon. I know that you'll be at AQO this year, so maybe that will be your next guest appearance. But other than that, I would love to have you back on our webinar to go over any other aorta or aorta sections. Thank you, Melinda, as always, for all your help with everything, and for just being a wonderful person. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Emily, and all of the STS and IQVIA team for joining. And thanks all. I hope you have all a great day. Great webinar as always. Lots of positive comments coming through. So thank you, everybody. Great job.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime. You're welcome back.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.